We're giving them equipment we have in our inventory that we haven't given to the Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Is this in advance, though? Because we're talking about $14 billion on Capitol Hill. That would help to pay for some of this?
Yeah, I don't think it'll pay for the small, not small arms, but the Apache equipment, the munitions. The $14 billion for Israel, there's $3.4 billion of that for weapons, basically. $3 billion of that is for the Iron Dome. It's like 14,000 interceptors and like 100 more launchers, which means they could exponentially expand their current 10 battery arsenal over there, but quite a bit. These are talking about Army inventories, mostly Army equipment that the U.S. would eventually pay back through the other supplementals, I think. But what's on the Hill for Israel now is not reflected in my story today. The 30 millimeter rounds, the Hellfires, those will be paid for later. Going forward, the money in the supplemental is for Iron Dome, David Sling Stunner missiles, and it's up to 100 launchers, which is a big deal. The Ukraine issue, total stop. The Pentagon right now has authority to spend $4.9 billion more in presidential drawdown packages. They have authority to do it, but they only have appropriations to spend $1 billion to replace that money.
Understood.
So we're not at the end of the line of the spigot yet. The end of the line of the spigot. The spigot's not being turned off yet.
Got it.
There's still more drips, of $4.9 billion worth of drips for Ukraine. But if you want to shoot more
specific than anything I've heard this week, though, Kaylee.
Yeah.
So that gives us a very good sense of
So
where we are.
there's authority and then there's appropriations, like the way the Hill works.
Well, and when I look at what is a very extensive list of the military aid the Pentagon is already sending to Israel, is there anything Israel is asking for that the Pentagon does not already have the authority or the ability to give them?
Not that I'm aware of. There's an interesting nuance, though. We have a war reserve over in Israel, a contingency reserve, munitions and equipment for Middle East conflicts. Within the supplemental, there's a request to waive a limit of $200 million a year in the value of equipment we can put into that fund, that reserve that Israel can draw on. But it's not a limit on. It doesn't raise the limit on what Israel can actually pull. It's a waiver, a request for $200 million. Limit that the U.S. is under now that they can put in every year. A nuance, but it's a part of the supplemental.
You point out some controversy over the artillery shells, the 155 millimeter shells that I mentioned. More than 30 relief organizations wrote the defense secretary urging him not to send that specific weapon because of, I guess, its lack of precision would be the best way to put it. Ambassador Jeffrey, who I mentioned, was with us last hour, and he said, not in the hands of the Israelis. They know how to use these things. What's the Pentagon's response to that?
Frankly, I haven't asked, but I can give you an explanation here.
Fine, yeah.
These are not those Excalibur GPS rounds we've given Ukraine. We've given them like 8,000 of these Excalibur rounds.
These are old-fashioned mortar rounds, right?
Well, no, these are howitzer rounds, but Israel's got much more precise technologies for triangulating where these weapons would go, these howitzers would go, where the shells would go. So I'd give them more credit than they would just be indiscriminately sent. These are high explosive rounds, by the way. They're not the cluster munition types that we've sent to Ukraine. I saw some reporting saying that the U.S. was sending cluster versions of the 155s. What I saw was HE, called high explosive.
Got it.
But I gave Israel more credit in terms of their ability, their command and control ability. They're in a highly precise military in many ways. Yeah. But to put these things basically where they're intended to go, even though they're not GPS guided.
Okay, so that's what Israel could be sending into conflict zone, right? There's also a question of what's coming out of the conflict zone, trying to get into Israel, hence the Iron Dome, and what has been with a fair degree of accuracy, a high degree of accuracy, I would say, amazing. Intercepting of those missiles. Do you have a sense of how the Pentagon is trying to balance what Israel needs weapon-wise outbound and then that defense system? Or does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I think this supplemental request for 14,000 interceptors, that's a lot. If you look at it this way, Israel hasn't really said how many they've fired over the last decade, but if they claim 9,000 intercepts or 5,000 intercepts, give or take one or two missiles per missile, one or two interceptors per bad guy missile, a Hamas missile, you're going to get a sense of what they've fired to date. I mean, maybe it's 10,000 or 12,000 have actually fired.
Wow.
But if we're giving them capability to build 14,000 over the next X number of years, that's an exponential increase. But the launches to me is a big deal because that just expands the amount of places you can cover.